All right, we will get started on the next hearing. The next hearing is on Council Bill 21-0096, a building code permit exemption for sheds, etc. This is the Rules and Legislative Oversight Committee. I am Chairman Schleifer of this committee, and I will give a quick outline on this bill, being that I am the bill sponsor. And so people buy small sheds from the store to store their lawnmowers, gardening supplies, bikes, anything else, etc. So we much prefer to see those items stored in a clean manner rather than just, thrown out on people's lawns. So currently, if you want to have a shed, it says in the Baltimore City Code that you need a site plan, need to get a permit, which is similar to what you would need to do if you're building in addition or a new house. So the adjustment that I'm looking for is to bring this in line with the surrounding jurisdictions, like Baltimore County and other jurisdictions in Maryland that follow the national codes for building codes, and that you're not required to get a permit if you have one of these small storage sheds, which are no larger than 10 by 12. Right now, there are many thousands of Baltimore City households that are not in compliance with this law, and I've heard from many of them that they are not aware this is even a law. However, what we constantly hear is that ignorance of the law does not permit you from violating it, and so too, related violations that can come from a shed, or the use of a shed, does not make it okay to violate those laws either. And so, in preparation of this bill, I've heard from some agencies and some of my colleagues about, related concerns that, when you have a storage shed, one concern that was mentioned was, what if somebody goes and puts it in the alleyway behind their house, or a paper alley, or puts it over their property line onto their neighbor's yard, or violates other laws, whether it be CHAP zoning districts, whether it be other zoning related laws, whether it be really a whole series of, you can use your imagination. There's a lot of different ways that you can violate laws, just like, when you legally own a car and you have a license to drive it, that doesn't permit you to fly down the street at 100 miles an hour because there's a law that forbids you from doing so. And so when you come to a situation like this, we have to weigh all the different pros and cons. And so in hearing from my colleagues about some related concerns and some of the agencies about potential confusion that people might have on whether or not they have to follow other laws, I had spoken to Mr. Hessler this afternoon and mentioned the concerns that were brought up to me today. And in speaking with him, and also speaking to Legislative Reference, and thank you to Tony for working on this right away, is that I want to put forth an amendment to address those concerns. That amendment has been sent to everyone's inbox, and basically the amendment is to clarify that you have to follow all other related laws so that there's no confusion down the road. Originally, when we were working on the bill, we didn't think that was necessary, but we're always happy to address any potential issue when it comes to something reasonable like that. And so we're putting forth that amendment. And certainly, if there's other ideas that people come up with, later on, we're certainly happy to entertain other amendment ideas. However, we think that this resolves that overarching concern. I do also want to say, I appreciate some of the agencies have sent in reports already. I do want to just clarify for the record that I apologize to those who have not had the opportunity to do that. That is completely squarely on me. That if you did not have an opportunity to put that together due to the time constraints, and so any agency that does not have a letter on file. I completely understand that, and certainly happen to hear from you today. And so I will just go through some of the agencies to see the ones that submitted reports to see if they stand by their report, and any other agencies that are present that would like to say anything they'd like to say, and then we'll move on to committee questions. And so since I see Eric Tiso just popped up over here on my screen, and I see you sent in a report. Do you stand by your report?
Yes, Mr. Chair, and one thing I did not have the opportunity to include in more detail was comment from my colleague Brina Attila, who's our floodplain manager, and she says that there might be some concerns with accessory structures, and sorry, I'm looking to the side reading an email from her, with the National Flood Insurance Program requirement. So we'd like to have a little bit more time to look into how that might be addressed. Understand what you're going for here. And the zoning code requirements would still apply. So I could easily see, especially in our denser row home neighborhoods, a problem where somebody could buy a shed, put it on the street corner required side yard. They maybe already have a patio or a pool or something that blocks where it should have gone by zoning in the rear yard. Then they get a complaint, zoning violation. Now they can't fix it because they don't have a place to put it. That leads to a zoning hearing. So I could easily see cases where it might end up being more headache than is alleviated. So we're happy to work with you on trying to figure out solutions if we can.
Sure, and I appreciate it. I'm certainly open to discussing that, and if there's any amendments that we work together and deem necessary, I'm always happy to introduce that, even if it's on second read or third read or wherever it may be. I'm always happy to work with you guys on that. So I appreciate that. I will also just point that I noticed in your report. It talks about like accessory structures and other dwellings, up to 180 square feet. And so I just wanted to just clarify for you guys. I understand you pulled that from the code. This bill is stating that is going in line with the other jurisdictions and also with the national building codes, which suggest that structures that are 10 by 12 or below not have to have this requirement. And so I see yours says 180 square feet. I just wanted to just make you aware that we're looking at 120 square feet and below. But I appreciate you getting on this. So thank you. Next up, I see Marcia Collins from DPW.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Marcia Collins, representing the Department of Public Works. I checked the website very quickly, and I see that you did receive our bill response. For us, as we mentioned in our bill response, typically if there's construction occurring under a building permit, there are certain parameters in which we would review for stormwater management and for erosion and sediment control. And in this case, even under the current code, a structure the size as you describe in your proposed legislation would not be sufficient to trigger those reviews. So we wouldn't see any change. We wouldn't anticipate having any concern regarding that case and the size of the structure that you're proposing here in this amendment to our existing international code. So we're square that way. And for those who may not know, if the disturbance is less than 5,000 square feet or less than 100 cubic yards of earth being disturbed, then we would not enact any sediment and erosion control or stormwater management reviews. It is possible, we mentioned in a report, that's possible that an additional structure might impact someone's stormwater fee, but because of the size we're talking about here, you'd have to really be on the cusp to trigger that kind of change that would be necessary. Our only caveat, and I think your amendment also emphasizes your intention, which is to follow all other related laws, is that we would not want to see these structures constructed within an easement, utility easement, or in a stormwater management easement. So at that, we just deferred to Housing and Community Development and Law because we felt our concerns were minimal and were addressed by your legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marcia. Stephanie from Housing, do you stand by your bill report?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members of the committee. Stephanie Murdoch, Legislative Liaison for DHCD. DHCD supports the sponsor's intent to streamline the installation of sheds for constituents throughout the city of Baltimore. However, the legislation does raise a number of concerns which we've outlined in our report. DHCD stands by our report in opposition to the bill as written, but would be happy to work with the sponsor and sister agencies to discuss possible amendments to address some of these concerns.
All right, thank you, Stephanie. And just also for the record, after, you know, when this first came up, the reason for where it came up and the sense of urgency came up is that you have people who want to get permits for many other things in the city, whether it be plumbing, if you got a plumbing issue in your home, or anything else that you want to do, get a new hot water tank if you don't have any more hot water in your house. All of that requires permits in the city, and having right now a gardening storage shed that puts your property in violation, and so you can get a stop work order, and which would prevent you from getting any other permits in the city, even ones that are emergency that you would need. And so that's where this, if I didn't mention that in my introduction, that's where this bill started from. And actually, the first individuals I reached out to, to find out more, to understand better what the issue was, were actually not even aware that this was also a requirement until further research was done. So clearly, I know there's countless people in all of our districts that are in violation and just not aware of that today. So thank you so much, Stephanie. And again, like I said with Eric, if there's future things that we can work on together, or edits that, amendments at any point that are necessary beyond what Jason and I spoke about today. Certainly, as a bill sponsor, I'm always open-minded to making any edits that would help perfect the bill. I'll now turn it over to law. Elena.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. So the law department, we had sort of limited time to review this bill, but the thing that jumped out at us initially was the potential zoning compliance issue, which Eric has aptly summarized. So we actually want, we are in favor of your amendment to put a general caveat in there that, subject to other existing laws. Because without, we really didn't have time to canvass the entire code for what other things might be applicable to this proposal. So given your amendment, we feel a lot more comfortable with approving the bill.
All right, thank you very much. I see next up that we have Chief Clark from the Fire Department.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. And the Fire Department, we stand by our report. If there are any questions from the chair, the Fire Marshal, I just need to ask if we can unmute the Fire Marshal, because I do have him on as well. Okay,
Richard, if the Fire Marshal, is he yeah, he's listed as an attendee, Derek Lamont Reddy. If you can please elevate him to the panelist list. Thank you. Okay, he's been elevated. Fire Marshal, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Good afternoon, Derek Reddy, the Fire Marshal. Have no objections to this. We stand by our report as it falls under the 180 square foot threshold.
Thank you very much. Now I will move on to members of the, oh, sorry, Liam. I'm sorry, I missed you over there. DOT.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. DOT stands by its bill report, which is no objection. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Did I miss anybody else? I'm just looking at who I see on my screen. Nope. Okay, I will move on to members of the committee. Council Vice President Middleton, do you have any questions for myself or any of the agencies?
No, Mr. Chair, the questions were pretty much answered with all that square footage information, so no questions.
All right, thank you very much. Next up, Councilman Burnett.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and colleagues. What I didn't hear, and I don't know if there's anybody from CHAP on the call that could weigh in on the, it sounds like the amendment may address some of the concerns, but I did send this out to a few of the neighborhood leaders in my district that I know this issue has come up with, in particular in the context of CHAP approval. And to summarize, a lot of the concerns I received back were concerns about the property line disputes, sightline issues, safety issues, but also just the key piece was around making sure that there's still adherence to the design requirements and approval requirements that CHAP has. And so I don't know if there's anybody that can speak to that, or if you want to address it in the context of your amendment. I just saw your amendments. I wasn't sure how it sort of fit into that ecosystem.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Councilman Burnett, for bringing that to my attention. I mean, I also have some CHAP blocks in my district, so I understand the questions and concerns that come up there, and they're very valid and important to note. I know one of our other colleagues also brought up that same question, and so in speaking to others to figure out a way just to make sure it's clarified, that is exactly why we have that amendment. So. Just another similar example that we discussed was right now, if you want to have a swing set or a playground in your backyard, you're welcome to do that as a matter of right, which is also listed right next to where these sheds are listed in the national codes. And so I know I have a swing set in my backyard for my daughters, and if I wanted a more backyard and I wanted to move it over to the property line or move it onto my neighbor's yard, that would be in violation of other rules, zoning rules, and just property rules of going into the property. So it's my understanding in talking to Jason, legislative reference and law, that is that all those other laws will still apply. This does not give you the right to violate any other law that you can possibly violate with a shed. And so whether it be a CHAP district or just be sight lines, property lines, excuse me, it is our understanding that this amendment does address that and will prevent those other potential violations from continuing to be violations. So thank you for bringing that to me.
Got it. The second question I had, and again, this could be for you or Eric. How does the amendment, so in the planning department's agency report, they raised concerns about without having an inspection, the potential for building in the creation of a zoning violation, and then that sort of they essentially say without permit review would require the complaint that generate an inspection for the city to discover it. Worst case scenario may be possible that the property owner may not be able to move the shed to a location that satisfies those requirements, which then creates a need for a variance hearing before the BMZA. Does the amendment impact that piece where someone could build it in a spot they don't know they didn't realize they were breaking the law, and now have like 3 more processes or 2 more processes they have to go through to fix it?
Exactly. So I'll try to answer that, and if you want further on that, I'm happy to hear from anybody else. But we did bring up that exact issue that was raised about other potential laws that could be broken, and that leads to I think what I brought up in my intro, and an example that I think I mentioned was about having a vehicle, right? So if you buy a car and you can legally park it on the street, I mean, there's certain places you can park, certain places you can't park. You can't just drive your car onto your front lawn and leave it there if you want to. I mean, there's housing violations there, and so too when it comes to a storage shed like this, you have to follow all other laws. You have to make sure that it's on your property and that you're following those laws. And so although there certainly is the more bureaucracy or red tape there is in anything, the more eyes that look at any situation, you certainly can find other potential issues. But similar to how most other laws are handled and how vehicle laws are handled, I recall from driver's ed, we're told just follow every law. And sometimes if you ever go to like Manhattan or DC, and you try to park, you're looking at the signs like 20 times trying to figure out are you allowed to park here? You're not allowed to park here, because they're so confusing between what spot you're in, or the hours, or the side of the street. And so, so too with this kind of thing, like you have to, your ignorance of the law does not make it okay to violate any other laws that are in place. And so if you do it, there's consequences to that, and you might have to move it, or you might have to do something else. So does that answer your question?
I mean, it does. My concern, though, is that I think they raise a good point that sometimes that inspector can serve as a education tool for the city. So, you get that inspection, hey, this is where I'm thinking about putting it. That sort of first line where we're not creating an unintended consequence, where there is no connect, that initial conversation about placement that would have taken place if they knew they needed a permit. I agree with you. I didn't know you needed a permit until you put this bill in. I also don't have a shed, but I think that education piece by peeling this out could create some headaches for people, and I guess it's something for us to maybe think through about a communication strategy overall. Maybe working with businesses to post something that this is still subject to zoning code. I don't know what that looks like, but my concern would be that somebody spends the money, however much it costs to buy one of these, gets it, puts the foundation down, starts doing whatever they're doing for installation. Neighbor calls on them, and now they have to not only relocate it, but zoning stuff that may have been avoided if we had that initial education piece. And maybe it doesn't need to be an inspector, but just something to throw out there.
Yeah, I'm definitely open to any ideas that you have. We can talk offline about any like posting or any other marketing ideas on how to get that message across. I think also one thing I had said, I had mentioned before, which is what partially what prompted the bill, because I was not aware that you needed a shed, and like I mentioned, I don't have one, but when I spoke to two different people who are tasked with, within the permitting department, there was two different understandings on whether or not you needed one or not. And so there wasn't even complete clarity with that. So, there is always a potential that you get two different inspectors who have two different interpretations, or just knowledge two different ways. And so it's an ever evolving process with this national code. And so I think that, anytime there's updates being made, there definitely needs to be a communications component to it. And I think that could also be done pretty heavily at the business level, like you mentioned, because there's really only a couple places, that you can go and buy a shed locally. And so we know those places. We know you walk into a hardware store. I'm not going to start naming them. I'm not marketing for them, nor do I have a preference between the big ones. But they really should be educating people, on that, and that should be something that is included when you're buying it, kind of like the rules of, the etiquette of having a storage shed. So that is something that, I'm happy to reach out to contacts I have in those companies to float that idea and see what they say. So thank you for that.
Let's keep talking on that. Yep.
Absolutely.
And Councilman, I'm also happy to try to address your question if you like, Mr. Chair.
Sure, go ahead.
Yes, so when reviewing a permit, DHCD's main considerations are where the shed will be located, what it'll be used for, and how the structure is constructed and tied down. So if we don't get a permit to review in advance, we don't know if there's a problem until a complaint arrives, and may cause enforcement issues after the structure is built. For example, the current zoning code only permits sheds, tool houses, or other storage structures in the rear yards of residential zoning districts. They are not permitted in the front yards, corner side yards, or interior side yards. So there could be a situation where someone might install a shed in a front yard, let's just say, and then the neighbor reports it to 311, and zoning would have to come out to investigate if they were in fact unaware of the other laws that they need to keep in mind when installing a shed. So that's just an example.
And thank you for that, Stephanie. And
Thank you.
I had an issue came up in my district a few years ago where there was conversations about whether or not somebody would have to move their house because they built their house too far forward to the street. There was some setback issues, and it was a big battle in BMZA about that, and I think ultimately they didn't have to move their house, but because it was technically in up to code, but it was also there was some community setbacks that were over and above zoning, but certainly again, the reason why that went to that case was ignorance of the law. Like had it been like I think 5 or 10 feet more forward, or violated the city ordinance, then they would have required this person to actually pick up and move their house back, which I found that at the time that was even humanly possible. I did not know you could move a house until then, but you can. Next up that I see here, Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for you and maybe even Ms. Murdoch. So I was one of the ones who mentioned to you that there are some communities that where the shed is actually on the paper alley right of way, and they're not allowed to do that. And it has caused a stormwater. Well, there's a stormwater management issue that is going to have to be fixed, and these people are going to have to move their sheds. So if we don't have the requirement that you need a permit, then people won't know that they can't put their shed in the right of way. So, right? I mean, so shouldn't be the reverse, that we need to do a better job of telling people that they need a permit so that we can avoid this happening? I'm just curious.
Well, if I could just respond as far as the mindset of the bill, the example you're giving, people have their shed in the paper alley. Is that correct? Is that the example we're talking about? Yeah. So they don't own that property. So, if I need more storage space, I can't just go and do that. Just like, you can't just dump, you can't dump your cars or other property, in the alley. And so we currently right now have on the books that regardless of the size of a shed, you need a permit and you need site plans for that, and there's a whole process. But I think that example is a little different than than what we're dealing with, because I mean those are people who they're using space that behind their house that they simply they don't own. So again, I guess ignorance of the law is not an excuse to violate it. But Stephanie, do you have something you want to add to that?
I just think the councilwoman is correct. I mean, part of the permitting process is that site plan review. And while her example was a paper alley, there could also be situations where, different zoning districts have different setback and coverage and lot area requirements. So it could be a situation where maybe the shed is on their property, but it's up against someone else's fence or against their house. Or as I mentioned earlier, in the front yard or the corner side yard in a place where the zoning code doesn't allow it. And that of course would not be discoverable until it's reported and code enforcement would go out or zoning enforcement would go out and take a look.
Sure. And just for the record, I mean, it actually just reminded me of a situation that I had in the district last year. And again, even then, I was not aware that this permit was required, but there's somebody who has a storage shed that they have set back well beyond their property line, and it's on the property of a commercial property that's behind their house. So it's actually sitting on that property, that the shed wasn't on their property, and so they were aware of that. They put it there because they wanted more room in their backyard, but ultimately that was something that had to be moved because it was a violation of the law. Next person up I see is Councilman Costello. You have any questions? No questions. Okay, Councilman Torrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions are still related to now that I hear the setback requirements from Stephanie. That's a concern for me. Stephanie, I have a number of CHAP districts, but also the topography of my district are a lot of people have built sheds that are on hills, and then they've had to do, how can I say this? They had to get a permit for the shed, but had to get a permit also for the concrete. So if a person were to build a shed, and they wanted to put it on concrete, would they still have to they would still have to get the permit for the concrete first before putting the shed on top of it? I just want to get that clarification.
Unfortunately, Deputy Commissioner Hessler and Zoning Administrator Veal are not able to be on the hearing today. So I don't know the exact underpinning requirements for sheds and how they're supposed to be pinned down, so to speak, and whether a permit pad is required. So that's something that I would have to get back to you on.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Next person I see up here is Councilman Conway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been listening diligently, trying to really understand the ins and outs of it. Appreciate the insights from housing and their concerns. I wanted to, if you could quickly go through again the concerns that housing has, so that I can maybe understand. I do understand the sort of someone gets a shed and puts it in their side yard or front yard. I'm thinking in my mind, if someone complains, they just move it. But I guess if no one complains, then no one has an issue with it.
Right. So, going back to my initial conversations with housing, so we spoke about that. And so I guess that's also what prompts something right now. So people don't realize they're in violation of this code today unless somebody actually reports them. So, when you go home tonight and you, or actually most of us are at home right now, but next time you go out and you look around, you'll see storage sheds everywhere you turn. Many of your neighbors, I'm sure, have them. And so if you ask them if they're aware of that, they would say no. But that is something that we discussed was, what happens about these potential other, issues that you can catch by, whether or not someone's putting it, within their property lines or putting it where they're allowed to, or following any other zoning laws. And so, the most critical piece and the reason that the national building codes allow for this exemption and the surrounding jurisdictions around us have the exemption in place is because we're talking about a 10 by 12 or smaller. And so we're not talking about a large garage where you can fit cars into, or there's other major utility uses that can happen. Another issue that we were talking about is what happens if somebody decides they want to turn a shed into a house and go connect a water supply to it and go connect electricity. Well, all of those are major violations and against the law. And so we can't prevent every law from being broken. And again, I hate to keep saying the same thing, but I feel like that's really where we go back to, is that ignorance of the law does not exempt you from following the law. And so all of these other factors that we spoke about in the conversations, my initial conversations with housing, they all surrounded around what are the potential things that can come up. And so although having a small garden shed for your lawnmower and these items for your bicycle, it's not, that's not a problem. There are potential problems with what you do with it and where you put it and all of those items. And, I guess the determination that we came to was, and that I came to in moving forward with the bill, is that you can't prevent every scenario from taking place. You can just, deal with each individual issue. And so there's not a single example that we went through, and the swing sets was the closest example that we went into, which is, you're by law right now, you can go and put a swing set in your backyard. You can put it, across your entire backyard if you'd like. And if you're going over into your neighbor's property line, that's a violation. And if you're shooting fireworks off of it, that's also a violation, even though the swing set is legal, but the location of it is illegal, or or what you're doing with it is illegal. So I hope that kind of answers your question on that.
It does. I mean, I think I understand that part of it. For the things that are illegal, they are still illegal, and folks would get fined or have to go through a process through zoning in order to fix those concerns. Um, are is there another wrinkle that I'm not understanding here?
I mean, look, I think with anything, there's always, there's always a lot of questions you can ask. I know, like in the planning report, it mentioned 180 square feet. Well, I guess, if we went larger, if we made the exemption larger than what the National Building Code's suggestion is, well, yeah, then there's, the bigger it is, the more potential issues. And so I think that the reason and the intention of the National Building Codes for saying a 10 by 12 or below is because it kind of addresses a lot of those other things. So like again, you can't fit a car into it, really. You can't do a lot of other things that perhaps you can do if you had a lot larger structure, and you can't run utilities to it, and you can't do a lot of those things. And so I guess that was the intention. Look, you can never prevent, a whole series. You can't prevent everything from taking place. And so, you do the best that you can. And I think that's what we did over here.
And Mr. Chair, I think in trying to better understand your reason for putting this forward, is it that you're seeing a lot of people are just doing it anyway, and this is just the reality that we're in? And right now, HCD just doesn't know that these sheds exist, or
Well, it's more than that. I mean, that certainly is a secondary component to it. There are many thousands of these sheds all across the city in every single council district that are not permitted. Many and thousands of them. And so my intention in doing this wasn't to say, oh, okay, let's take all those people who are out of compliance. And a lot of the sheds, by the way, are a lot larger than the size we're proposing here. So we're really talking more of like a bare bones utility use. There's a lot of sheds that are out there that are larger, and they're going to still continue to be in violation of the shed law. Like if you want to build a larger shed than a 10 by 12, or you want to buy a larger one, you still need a permit for that. But here in this utility use, the critical thing was more of like, and the reason why I find that it's important to move it ahead quickly, is first of all, I believe it is a pretty common sense bill to address this issue. And again, that's not just me saying it's common sense. I mean, that's something that the National Code felt was reasonable. But the thing that really struck a stronger chord in me was that we deal with most of the housing code stuff that we deal with on a regular basis. The whole purpose of that is the number one most important thing is life and safety. And so when it comes to electrical permits, and it comes to some of these other like really integral things, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of work everywhere being done without permits, and I don't support that. But there's a lot of the intention behind these rules is life and safety first and foremost. And when it comes to other things that people need, and that's actually what prompted me to look into this bill a lot more and to have a lot more conversations on it, was and have a sense of urgency, is that right now, if you are without hot water in your house and you need a hot water tank and you need plumbing done and you need that hot water and you need a permit for that, and your neighbor calls, your neighbor doesn't like that your dog, is barking outside, and calls, code enforcement, and they come out and write you a stop work order for your shed that's in your backyard that you never even knew was a violation, and frankly shouldn't be a violation, a small storage shed that houses your lawnmower. That I believe is a bigger life and safety issue, that then somebody's either going to get unpermitted work to get it, because you're not going to go without hot water in your house. So if you can't get a permit to get the hot water tank, most people are going to just opt to just going ahead and doing it anyways. And my district experienced really the most horrific thing that I've seen in my entire life with the explosion on Labyrinth Road, and we know that there was work that had been done there. And had there been proper permitting, and had there been more eyes on the work that was done, perhaps, you know, the leaks or other situations would have been caught. And I would hate, and this isn't related to a shed, but I would hate that somebody not get a permit for work like that, like gas work or electrical work, things that could really spark major life and safety issues. I would not want them to not get a permit for that simply because they can't get one because of something small like having a gardening shed. So that's really the impetus behind this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If at all possible, regardless of what we move forward today, it would be helpful to know from HCD how many, excuse me, I got babies crying in the background, how many permits we get yearly for this, how many we have, you know, approved in maybe the last 5 years, just to sort of understand the volume that's coming through. Just sort of wrap my head around how often this is a problem, and then if we have any violations, understanding those violations and where they come from. But I've gone over my 2 questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're entitled to ask you can ask as many questions as you want. You know, I'm looking at this as an open dialogue. You know, I didn't ask HCD for the exact number. So Stephanie, if you could follow up to the committee on an exact number of how many people have gotten it, maybe even go back multiple years. I don't think this year is necessarily a good example, although I'm sure a lot of sheds were purchased this year because people are out in their yard a lot more this year than they've ever have been in the past. Maybe if we go back 3 years, 5 years, something like that is probably reasonable. But when I did mention that to Mr. Hessel when I was talking about it, and the impression that I got was that it wasn't many that were actually requested for this, and the ones, and I think Stephanie, if you can zero in on this, also specifically looking at the size, maybe Councilman, is it reasonable to ask if we have it just broken down by 10 by 12 and below versus anything above 10 by 12? So anything above 10 by 12, even if this bill were to pass, you'd still be required to get a permit and have site plans and go through that whole process. But I think it would be interesting to know, like, an exact number, and I agree with you, Councilman Conway, like how many people that have a 4 by 6 or 6 by 8 or an 8 by 10 shed or 10 by 12 shed, how many of them actually have gotten permits in the past handful of years? Because we see them popping up. So I thank you very much.
Yes, Councilman, we'd be happy to look into those numbers for you and get back to the committee. If I could, I just wanted to make a comment about the national code, because you're right, the surrounding jurisdictions, they do have this in place. When we first adopted the ICC, we chose to exempt this provision, which, like you said, is in place in surrounding counties. But the reason that we amend our code to fit Baltimore City is because Baltimore City isn't quite like the rest of Maryland. You know, if you have 5 acres out in Washington County, then you can go and buy a shed and plop it in your yard. But if you live in a densely populated row house neighborhood, the decision of your neighbors more directly impacts the health, safety, and welfare of your neighbors. So like I said at the beginning, we're happy to work with you on this bill to consider the amendment. Hopefully it addresses the various zoning issues that were brought up today. And, you know, we stand by to work with you.
Thank you very much. And Richard, can you elevate? I see Councilwoman Ramos is in the attendee list, so maybe she can just elevate.
That she was leaving, so let me see if I can.
Yeah, maybe she had technical issues and had to restart.
Well, okay. She chatted a few minutes ago that she was leaving because of flooding in her district.
Oh, definitely see it coming down out there.
Yep.
Okay. Do you see her there? If you can elevate her, maybe it looks like she's on her phone on there.
Okay. I've hit the icon and make panelist, and there's no response. She's staying as a attendee, so I'm not sure what the problem was. Let me see. Try to unmute her unsuccessfully. I think she's having technical problems, the chair. Mm.
Richard, is she able to, is it not working to elevate her?
No, I clicked the icon to elevator and it doesn't respond. She stays as an attendee. I also tried to unmute her unsuccessfully.
Okay, let me try to reach out to her. Give me 1 minute if you don't mind.
Let me check. Okay, well, she's now off the attendee list. So let me see if she's showing up.
Mr. Chair, I have a question if you don't mind me asking. This is of HCD.
Okay. Does anybody else have any further questions? Go
I
ahead,
do.
Councilman Conway.
I wanted to add to that data request. If HCD, if we could get an understanding of how long it takes to approve these permits, that'd be really helpful as well. I mean, I imagine for someone that has a weekend and just wants to go get their shed, you know, of course, it'd be nice to be able to go out there and just grab it. If we're pretty quick, it doesn't, you know, cause too much a problem. But if it does take us weeks, then I could see certainly an issue there as well. Also, Councilwoman Ramos just texted me. I don't know if you had a chance to touch with her, Mr. Chair. She said let her know if she's when we vote.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, she's now dropped off the attendee list and is not on the panelist list either. So
No problem. Okay, thank you. And also, Stephanie, if I could just add on to Councilman Conway's request, if you could also outline every step that is necessary with that. I know there's multiple agencies involved, and so you know, one of the things that came up in my conversations with the housing department was that you need a site plan, and so I think the average household. I mean, I don't know personally where my property lines are. I'm sure there's plenty others who don't know exactly where their property lines are either. And so I know one of the requirements is a site plan, and you have to have a drawing, and you have to have that information. So although it might say, hey, you need a site plan and drawing where your property lines are, that could also require bringing in a professional to survey that and to get you that answer. So if you can just give us the step-by-step also as a request, in addition to what Councilman Conway has requested. Any other questions?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Councilwoman Middleton. So it's mainly just a statement. I know you worked hard on this bill, and I definitely appreciate the timing of this. especially since I think all of us are having lots of different types of redevelopment that's happening. New homes are going to be built, new communities, new people with home ownership. I see this as another beginning of just trying to get people, helping to educate people and getting them aware of things they can and cannot do on their properties, and also, the beautification efforts that we are trying to do and improve just throughout our entire city. So, again, this is a piece of work that you start and then you add things as we go along. There's lots of like some of the council members have mentioned, there are lots of things on the books that people don't know about, and it's constant education for everyone. I remember putting in a bill a few years ago that passed on businesses not putting drug paraphernalia actually showing. A person has to come up and ask for it, and again, that's all education piece. So I support your bill, and I'm ready to move forward.
So thank you, Councilwoman. One thing I will say, as far as the discussion that we've had today, and I appreciate your support on that, and I agree. This is, when we're trying to attract more families to stay and raise their family in the city, there's a lot of additional things that you need, like you need to have a lawnmower to cut your grass. You need to have some of those supplies, and when you have kids, you need a place to store the bicycles. I know that. From growing up, I'd have a bike. I'd have to carry it into my house, carry it down to the basement. I can't even begin to tell you how difficult that's been. And more often than not, growing up, I would just leave it outside because I wasn't going to carry my bike up the steps and into the house, and then get yelled at if the tires were dirty, and then I attracted mud through the entire house. So certainly, I agree with you, Council Vice President Middleton, that this is an integral part of growing our city. And so that's why, having a small type structure like this, of a small size that doesn't have a lot of other, uses to it, like larger ones where people can turn into an office or turn into, an auxiliary dwelling, we're certainly cognizant of that. So what I want to say in light of that, and also in light of Councilwoman Ramos, she had an emergency, had to drop off. I want to get those answers from housing before moving forward. I know that we've had conversations on it, but I do like to see the data and the details, and actually have numbers to put with it. We all know it's a problem. We all, next time we drive down the street, we'll start noticing every shed in every yard. Now that it's a topic that we're looking at. And so, I have every intention to continue to move forward. For today, what I would just like to do is to simply just move the amendment, which is simply just a clarifying piece that says on page 2 in line 6, after IBC, insert and subject to all applicable local, state, and federal laws. This way, it was to clarify that there's plenty of other things out there, other laws, other rules, other factors to consider, and we want you to consider them. So anybody who did look up in the code to see, do they need a permit first, which I think is few and far in between, but we'll get those numbers from housing. Those who do look it up will not suffer those unintended consequences, because that's going to stick out like a sore thumb and say, whoa, hold on, what other laws are you talking about? And they're going to start reaching out to the permitting office and saying, hey, what else? What am I missing? What else do I need to know? And I think that's going to trigger that communication. I also want to get with Councilman Burnett, because I know that he's led the charge on a lot of different posting as it comes to businesses and other bills and legislation. And so I do think that his point about how to do that, maybe even finding a way in the future to encourage that at the point of sale, would make a big difference. I know when I go to the hardware store and I see the sheds sitting out there in the parking lot that you can buy, all it tells you is, you know, the specs of the shed. It doesn't tell you anything else that you need to know about it. You know, should you put it on cinder blocks? Should you leave it on the dirt? You know, what should you do? And I think that there is an education piece that needs to happen. So I will be holding this bill to have further discussion, to get some of that information back from housing, to have a follow-up conversation with housing, and also for planning, if you want to reach out and have that conversation. I'm looking forward to doing that. But in the meantime, if there's no other further questions, I would like to make a motion to move this amendment, which is the one and only amendment that we have so far.
Second.
Mr. Chair, can I, before we move it, is it okay if I do one more request for DHCD info request? Stephanie, would you be able to provide us, I'm just for our information, and even if it's in writing or at the next hearing, like what does the inspection process entail? So I think we kind of have a clearer picture of like what exactly are they looking for, what are they telling people when they're there, that kind of thing. So if you could provide that for us, that would be helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, that sounds very good. So I made the motion and it was seconded by Conway. Richard, we can do, I guess we can just do all in favor of the amendment.
You should do a roll call, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so go ahead.
Chair Schleifer?
Yes.
Chair Schleifer votes aye. Mr. Burnett?
Yes.
Mr. Conway?
Yes.
Conway votes aye. Mr. Costello?
Aye.
Mr. Costello votes aye. Vice President Middleton?
Yes.
Vice President votes aye. Member Ramos, are you still on it? She was on and off for me. It doesn't appear. Let me check, see if she wound up back in the thing. No, doesn't appear to be on, Mr. Chair. So we can come back. Mr. Torrance?
Aye.
Okay. There are 6 votes in the affirmative, no negatives. The bill is amended. If Mr. DeFranco is still on, could you email me a copy of the amendment?
I did see him on before.
Well, if not, I can get it tomorrow. So.
Yeah, I will ask him to send you an amended bill that includes that.
Mr. Chair.
Who's that?
It's Torrance. I have an additional request because I've been looking at online sheds and it says check our local building codes. What I asked you, housing is there a way that we can create a list of things or quick links on common things that we know that can easily be accessible for the public instead of going through the International Building Code, which is thick, like it can hold a door open. Things that we can have simple and ready for people to review if we do make this amendment, some type of implementation requirement so that it's clear. Because when I look at one shed, it says check, the owner's manual says check the local zoning codes or building codes.
Yes, sir. Both of those documents are well over 200 pages, so I can understand that frustration having gone through the Transform Baltimore process and the update to the BFRC. I will say that DHCD's website, ePermits website, does have information available 24 hours a day. You can apply for permits there. There are FAQ guides on the website as to what items do and don't need a permit. So there's actually even training sessions for folks who are going through the permitting process, like webinar type trainings that you can sit through to introduce for those that are new to the permitting process. So we do have a number of resources on our ePermits page, and I'll be sure to send those to the committee as well.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank everybody, all agencies and members of the committee and members of the council for for your time today and robust discussion. It was great. I think it was very productive, looking at all angles of this bill. And we will be in a recess until a future hearing is announced. Thank you very much.
Thank you.